Well, hello everyone. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the holidays and hopefully you're going to enjoy this video. This one is a doozy. I really enjoy this person with all the research that I've done and stuff like that. But, without further ado, we'll get right on in. So we've all seen or at least heard of the movie Rambo, in which the story revolves around a Vietnam War veteran who has gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, such as surviving a manhunt, rescuing POWs in Vietnam, and fighting in Afghanistan. Surprisingly though, we have a real-life Rambo of Mexican American and indigenous origins, that being Master Sargent Roy P Benavidez, also known as Roy. So get ready, sit back, and learn of the man who took bullets, stab wounds, explosives, and surviving. Roy was born in Lindenau near Cuero, Texas in DeWitt County, and is actually the descendant of the founders of Benavidez, Texas. He would be born the son of a Mexican farmer, Salvador Benavidez Jr., and to a Yaqui mother, Teresa Perez. Now for those who don't know, Yaqui is an indigenous people of Mexico who speak Yaqui, or Yome, who live around Pueblo or Sonora. And it would be at the age of 2 where his father would die of tuberculosis, and his mother would remarry, and about 5 years would pass before his mother would also pass as a result of tuberculosis. Roy and his younger brother Roger would move to El Campo, where his grandfather, uncle, and aunt would raise them alongside 8 cousins. And in order to make money, Benavidez would shine shoes at the local bus station, labored on farms in Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado, and would also work in a tire shop in El Campo. But in order to help support his family, he would end up dropping out of school at the age of 15 and would end up working full-time. It would also be said because of his mixed heritage, he would endure a lot of discrimination. Benavidez would enlist in the Texas Army National Guard in 1952 during the Korean War. And in June 1955, he would switch from the National Guard to the Army Active Duty. He would be initially stationed at Fort Ord, California, and then transferred to Germany to receive parachute training. And during his training, he would exchange letters with his childhood sweetheart, Hilara Coy, also known as Lala, where their relationship would intensify over time. And once he returned to the US, he would immediately send his uncle, grandfather, and local priest to ask Lala's father for his blessing. And he would get married on June 7th, 1959 in El Campos, Texas, and would then be assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. Roy would then be assigned to military police training at Fort Gordon, Georgia, where throughout his training, Roy would periodically get into trouble because of stubbornness and for having a hot temper. Even though Roy himself would later credit these qualities to his success in the Special Forces training in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where he would continue to climb the ranks, rising to the rank of Staff Sergeant with the 5th Special Forces Group, and would also become a member of the Studies and Observation Group, also known as SOG. He would be sent to South Vietnam in 1965 as a Special Forces advisor to an infantry regiment of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, also known as South Vietnam during this time because of the war. And so for this specific video, I actually got the book, or at least one of the books that was made by Roy, and this would have descriptions of his war during specific moments in time, such as the 6 hours in hell, and among a few other occasions. So now this won't make a lot of sense right now, but there would be a set of 9 rules during his time in Vietnam, and I'll list them off just so you can get a basic idea of what those were. So the 9 rules were: remember, we are guests here, we make no demands and seek no special treatments. Join with the people, understand their life, use phrases from their language, and honor their customs and laws. Treat women with politeness and respect. Make personal friends among the soldiers and common people. Always give the Vietnamese the right of way. Be alert to security and ready to react with your military skill. Don't attract attention by loud, cruel, or unusual behavior. Avoid separating yourself from the people by a display of wealth or privilege. And above all else, if you are members of the U.S. military forces on a difficult mission responsible for all of your official and personal actions, reflect honor upon yourself and the United States of America. So although the U.S. was involved in the Vietnam War, it was more of a war between the Vietnamese people from the South and the North. So it wasn't really more of like the US being a main player in this, because it was kind of like a war between them, and they were like, you can join, but you're not the one that's mainly fighting this. It's like for us. So that's where like the rule set is, just to make things clear that they were guests, that they had to treat the Vietnamese people with respect and stuff like that. And so there would be many brushes with death, with an occasion where he was actually invited to join mass by one of the Vietnamese officers, and he would agree up until his captain, Captain Lewis, told him to reconsider the plan. And Roy, obviously puzzled, asked him as to why, and the captain explained that Roy made it a pattern of going to church, and so if he was able to pick up on his routine, so would the enemy. And so them, without really saying much, Roy was able to get the message that maybe the officer might have been a VC agent. And for those who don't know what VC means, it basically just means Viet Cong, or the Viet Cong Army, which was the North, obviously fighting the South. So the following morning, he would hear the sound of the Jeep, where he would tell the two officers that he wasn't planning on going, and would actually take notice that the officer who invited him wasn't there. And it would actually turn out that there was a bomb planted in one of the bridges, and it went off killing the ones that were heading to church. And if you have the time and the money, I would highly recommend getting the book, as there are a lot of stories involving just bits and pieces of his time during Vietnam, such as stories of this one officer who was Vietnamese officer. He would describe him as being extremely crazy, and one of the stories was that they would go to a village and him alongside someone else would basically just walk in there, and that officer would, obviously, since he was crazy, he would start asking questions, them asking where the VC soldiers were. He would bring in some of the people from the village and basically would end game an old man. I believe it was with a gun in the back of the head, and he would continue to threaten the people, including him end gaming a mother who was pregnant, basically claiming that the baby was a VC child and stuff like that. So there's that story. There was also stories of them doing like reconnaissance, trying to gather information of a possible base in the jungle, and he would actually stumble upon it by falling, down a hill, finding it, and then one of the soldiers that was with him would offer to go, inside and look. Obviously, he was like, what are you doing? Why? Like, no, let's just look from here. It'd probably be best if we don't. And the guy was very adamant on doing it. So obviously he's like, okay, go ahead. And funny enough, once that soldier went into the camp, he would actually be able to pass through quite easily. Like, no one took notice of him, since obviously he was Vietnamese. So he kind of melded in with the rest of the enemy. So he would actually gather a lot of information and would actually return smiling at Roy, saying that he got like information about that base specifically. So there are stories that I highly recommend you look through in that book. As far as I've seen, you can't find it anywhere else, so highly recommend it. And also during his tour, he would go on a solo reconnaissance mission to gather intel on enemy troops, but during the mission he would actually step on a landmine, being severely injured but surviving. And he would be evacuated back to the US, where the doctors at Fort Sam Houston would conclude that he wouldn't be able to walk again, and that they would begin preparing his medical discharge papers. And during his acceptance speech in 1991, he would actually note how the news of his diagnosis, as well as the flag burnings and media criticisms of the US military presence in Vietnam, that he would see that all on TV, would actually make him determined to find the strength to get back up and walk again. And he would begin to do unsanctioned nightly training rituals in an attempt to regain his ability to walk. But I don't feel like I need to describe this, since we have him to tell us all about that.
And Vietnam was brewing up. In 1965, I was sent to Vietnam as an advisor to a Vietnamese infantry unit. After a short period of time there, I stepped on a mine. I woke up in the Philippine Islands in Clark Air Force Base. I was paralyzed from the waist down. I was declared never to walk again. I was transferred to Fort Sam Houston, Texas, Beach Pavilion. The doctors were initiating my medical discharge papers. But at night, I would slip out of bed and crawl to a wall, using my elbows and my chin. My back would just be killing me. I'd be crying. But I'd get to the wall, and I'd set myself against the wall, and I'd back myself up against the wall, and I'd stand there like Elijah the Indian. I'd stand there and move my toes right and left, right. Every single chance I got. And I wanted to walk. I wanted to go back to Vietnam because of what the news media was saying about us. Our president was not needed there. They're burning the flag, what. And I saw a lot of other patients coming back, limbs missing. I wanted to go back. I was determined. Because I remember when I was taught in jump school, our old Master Sargent would tell me, Benavidez, quitters never win and winners never quit. What are you? I'm a winner. And I remember my Special Forces training, one of the training missions that I was on, I remember that my leader would tell me, faith, determination, and a positive attitude. A positive attitude will carry you further than ability. You can do it, Benavidez. You can do it. I never forgot those 3 words. Never. So there I was at night. I'd slip out of bed. The nurses would catch me sometime. They would chew me out, give me a pill, a sleeping pill, put me to sleep. They would tell the doctors in the morning. I was determined to win. 9 months later, here comes my medical discharge paper. And I told the doctor, "Doctor, look what I can do." He said, "Sergeant, I'm sorry. Even if you can stand up, you'll never be able to walk." I jumped out of bed and I stood up right before him. My back was hurting, aching. I was crying. And I moved just a little bit. The doctor said, "Benavidez, if you walked out of this room, I'll tear the papers up." I walked out of that ward at Beach Pavilion. I walked out with a limp. I went back to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I started my therapy again, running 5 or 10 miles a day, doing 50, 100 push-ups. And I made 3 parachute jumps in 1 day. I was ready to go back to Vietnam, physically and mentally ready to go back.
And with the support of his wife, he would return to combat in Vietnam in January of 1968. And funny enough, in the book, it also mentions how he would also do it kind of, I believe, in the morning, or at least during the time where the nurses were still active, as he would describe a woman by the name of Mrs. Smith, who would occasionally, scold him for trying to get back up and trying to walk. And I kind of want to read a little bit of the book with this specific area, so that way you can get a general idea of how that experience was. Reaching up to the 2 nightstands, I managed to lever my body up. My legs swinging under me, it took almost 5 minutes, and I was exhausted, but I eventually stood upright, my back pressed against the wall. "Well, kiss my ass, look at that, Benavidez. You're going to break your neck and paralyze the rest of you." I couldn't even take time to see who the speaker was. With palms pressed flatly against the surface of the nightstand, my arms were all held up. While I felt nothing in my legs, the pain that sliced through my back made up for any lack of feeling below the waist. Red-hot pokers were laying across the middle of my back, and electric shock spasm jolted every nerve end. The agony brought tears to my eyes. Like a pathetic rag doll, I stood there, teardrops rolling down my cheek. But I was determined to stand on my own 2 feet. Strangers though they seemed to be, I released my hold on the nightstands, and immediately slid down the wall like a drunk passing out in an alley. Taking a breath, I reached for the stands, determined to have another go at it. But 2 white shoes and a starch white dress stepped into view before I could move. "Roy, do you mind telling me what you think you're doing?" I look up. I saw the pleasant black face of Mrs. Smith, one of the nurses. "Trying to walk, Mrs. Smith?" "Not tonight, Roy. Get back in bed." She helped me up and heaved me back into bed. "You're going to therapy, Roy," she said, an exasperated expression on her face. "If you can walk, they'll help you. Don't you be getting out of this bed anymore. You hear?" "Yes, ma'am." The next night was a repeated performance. Again, I made my way to the wall, inching across the floor, and again, I fell to the floor. This time, both Mrs. Smith and the other nurse on the floor, Miss Garcia, chewed me out before putting me back to bed. But there was no thought of giving up, and each evening I would make up the short pilgrimage across the floor. The cracks and crevices in the linoleum began to look familiar, like landmarks along the roadway. At some point, either the 4th, 5th, or 10th time, I don't know, the nurses no longer interfered. Instead, they would look on me as I sat panting, my back to the wall, trying to gather strength to try again, and asked if I needed help. All I had to do was shake my head, and they would smile and walk on. So yeah, this is a clear example of the kind of man he was, and it's actually inspiring to know that for a lot of people, sometimes they would choose to give up, but for him, he would fight through the pain, and of course, people would tell him, to get back on the bed and stuff like that, but he would still have the tenacity to keep on fighting. And that kind of spirit is very inspiring. And on May 2nd, 1968, a 12-man Special Forces patrol, which included 9, hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, Montagnard tribemen, who were indigenous people of the Central Highlands of Vietnam, would be surrounded by NVA infantry battalion of around 1,000 men. And again, I'm going to let Roy do the talking, but I'll kind of interject a little bit, just kind of describing the events that are happening, just in case he doesn't, or if I need to add anything extra.
So where I was standing there locked in, I was debriefing, just waiting for the next assignment. So here all of a sudden, next day, on the third day, I heard these people, scrambling, going helicopter pilots running to the airfield, and I stopped at our commo shack, and I heard over the radio, something like a popcorn machine, a tube, and I heard this guy, yelling and crying, just begging to come in, and they needed help. They wanted to be extracted. So I asked our operator, I said, "Hey, who are they?" He said, "I don't know."
And Roy would hear the radio call for help and would board in the helicopter to respond.
And so I ran with the chopper to the helicopter pad. I thought that they were going to fly out. Well, a secret mission operation at sea. No helicopters go in to help them. And there was one helicopter that was coming in, and he was pretty well tore up, and he had a door gun, a young man. I'll never forget the pictures in the book there. Michael Craig from California. He was 19 years old. We just celebrated his 19th birthday in March. And I unstrapped him from his seat. He was a door gunner, and he died in my arms. And the chopper pilots were getting off, and the co-pilot, and his last words I'll never forget, "Oh my God, my mother and father." And the pilot, Roger Waggy, you know how you get when you lose, a comrade, such a young man and everything. So, we consoled each other, and we tuned down a little bit. And the pilot was having trouble, my pilot was having trouble getting his helicopter started, so we had to jump it.
And only armed with a knife, he would jump from the helicopter 30 to 40 feet from the ground, carrying a medical bag and running to help the trapped patrol.
And right there and then, I made up my mind that I asked Roger Wagg, I said, "Hey," I said, "who's the team on the ground?" He says, "It's that black fellow that's part of your team." I said, "That's Leroy Wright. That was the guy that saved my life 3 days ago." And I owe it to him. Of course, we never look at it that way, I help you, you help me, you owe me your life. So I jumped in that helicopter, and we got the darn thing started. We jumped it and got it started, and all I had was my knife, and I had a bag of medical supplies. And I didn't need a weapon because everything comes to your mind. Everything, the training that you obtain comes into your mind all at once. They guided us in. Our forward air controller, as I showed you in the picture there, yeah. Lieutenant Turnow then, he's a brigadier general now. He finally guided us in, and he says, "Hey," he says, "you can't go in there." He says, that thing is hotter than a frying pan." I said, "I got to get in there. Get me another place." So he found me another little place where it's just bigger than a dime to go in there. So I asked Mr. McGivens, Larry McGivens, my pilot, I said, "Can you get me down there?" He says, "Well, it's going to be tough." I said, "Look, get me down as close as you can, and I'll get to the team." I said, "When you leave me, when I get off this helicopter, you fly towards where the team is, because I don't want to be disoriented." We didn't ask the team to burn smoke, because then that would give their position away. And of course, the enemy had them surrounded, and that helicopter was making a lot of noise. So Larry dropped me off, and I dropped about 10 feet. And I laid on the ground, and I looked up and saw where he was going. I got up and started running, and as I did, I felt a thorn on one of my legs. So I didn't know, where I was hit or I scratched myself in some tree or limb or something. So I reached down, and I brought my hand, and I saw blood. So I kept on going. I said, "Hey, that's it. So I can't stop here." So I yelled for Big Tim, Brian O'Connor, or I yelled for Leroy, who was a team leader. And then Musso came on, and Musso was laying closer than anyone else. Musso had been shot through the eye. His eyeball was hanging. He'd been shot through the stomach and his legs and arms. And he was just leaning against a tree. So I asked him, "Where's Leroy?" He says he doesn't know. So I got the radio, and I asked Larry to come on in and pick us up. We're getting organized, and so I asked the CIDGs who was with us, the mercenaries. So Larry came back. I got on the radio, and I finally got with O'Connor, and he was in pretty bad shape, and we got our CIDG together. So I asked Larry to come on in, and spray the area. We're going to lay low, flat on the ground. And I told him that give me 1 minute or 2 minutes and we get up to the landing zone. So we all got together, and the chopper came in and sprayed the area. Then they went over to the LZ. And as he did, we started running and we started dragging ourselves and dragging others, the wounded and everything, to get into him. And now I got shot again. That slowed me down, but anyhow, Brian got to the chopper and Musso got to the chopper. And I didn't want to leave Leroy, my brother, behind. You know, this guy had saved my life, so I went back to get him. And I wanted to get the classified material, of course, and the intelligence gathering. So I reached for Leroy to get the SOI and everything. And then all of a sudden, I heard a whoom. And I found out later I got shot in the back. So everything comes to your mind. And we all got together. We went onto a little huddle, and we set up a perimeter. I said, give me that radio. They started lobbing mortar to where that smoke was, see?
Yeah.
And because that position was given away, luckily we got out of there just in a hurry. And all that mortar and shrapnel started hitting us and everything. I had my head all sprayed, my back and my face, you know, and everything. I still got shrapnel. I was showing Wade's wife, you know, where I got shrapnel right up here and all over my hands here. And so we got away. And then we got the radio and we started talking to our forward air controller, our FAC. And he came in and he says, I got two fighters that are coming in, spraying the area. Lay low, I know where you at. I can see you. So here comes two jets, you know. They came in and fired a Gatling gun, 20,000 rounds a minute. So after a while, you know, I took another shot, and O'Connor took another, and I gave him a shot of morphine. Musso, I bandaged him up the best way I could. One of the interpreters, he had intestines that were just coming out, you know, and he had been shot pretty bad, riddled in the stomach. And this hot sun was drying him up, and he was really hurting. He begged me to kill him, and I wouldn't. And we finally got another helicopter to come on in, and that poor chopper pilot, he got hit, and he crash landed about a mile from us. And so here those guys unloaded from that helicopter and came and joined us, and I said, oh my God, I got more worries. One of the chopper pilots had a piece of wood struck through his ear, and where they crashed. And so here, you know, I told him, and I got on the radio again, started talking to our forward air controller, our FAC, and I told him, hey, what's going on? He says, just lay low. He said, we got some more support.
Hold on just a second.
Well, we got the air support to come in and helped us out. And we finally had one more helicopter coming in. One pilot got three other pilots to come in and get us out. Now, officers, it took 4 officers to man that helicopter. They put the instruments together with green tape. It was not operable, but they went in. The dedication that this men have, you know, they don't get enough credit. Roger Waggy came in, and he had suffered a lot too, so psychologically, you know. And they came in there, 2 warrant officers, 1 captain, 1 warrant officer, were door gunners. So they came in, and we started getting up to the helicopter, started getting and firing, helping each other out. I told them, I said, you can either crawl, you can walk, you can drag yourself, but this is the last damn plane in here. So we got to get out.
And at one point in the fight, an NVA soldier would actually stab Benavidez with a bayonet, with Benavidez actually holding and pulling on the bayonet, surprising the soldier. And so during that moment of surprise, Benavidez would actually grab his knife, pull it out, stab that man, ending his life, and then would basically continue on, leaving the knife on the man.
So I was helping Musso as I bent over to help Musso, and I've always said that he saved my life because I felt a blunt right in the back of my head. An enemy soldier had hit me, and I threw out a yell, you know, one of them special forces yelled, and swung around, and here I see this man with a weapon in his hand and a bayonet. And he comes down, and me like a fool thinking I was going to stop this thing, I put out my right arm, and he slashed it where I just showed you. So then he couldn't see me to go down, so he reared back and he hits me in the mouth with the butt of the weapon. I was so weak, lost the blood. I'd given myself already 3 morphine shots. And so here, you know, I'm yelling, I'm fighting for my life, and here he comes at me with the weapon and a bayonet, and I stepped aside, and I hold the bayonet with my left arm, and he was sawing that thing just like a log. And I reached in the back, and I got my knife out, and I started carving on his side, you know. I wish I'd remembered my zip code number so I'd have got my weapon back. I had to leave it in and stuck one in his bones.
And later on, he would actually get 2 more NVAs with an AK-47 that he managed to find and would provide cover fire for the people boarding the helicopter.
Throwing people out. Well, Bill Darling saw me, and I grabbed that man's weapon, luckily because I left my knife stuck on him. I grabbed the weapon, and as I was coming up to the chopper, Bill Darling saw me, and I leveled my weapon, and if he shot, I'm glad that he missed. But I had to shoot 2 enemy soldiers that was coming from under the helicopter, and he couldn't reach them. And when he saw me that I was holding my intestines in my right hand and holding moose on my left over my shoulder, and he got up, he let go of his machine gun. He got up, and he should have never done that. He got shot 3 or 4 times in the stomach, and they pulled me in, and I gave him thumbs up. And Roger Waggy said that he couldn't get his pedal, he couldn't touch his pedal because of the blood flowing inside the helicopter. And there was blood flowing on both sides of the helicopter as we lifted up.
And for those who maybe know a little bit about Roy's story, they might know this part. So when he was evacuated to base, he would be examined and thought to be dead on account that he couldn't open his eyes because of the blood that dried up in his eyes, and also because of his jaw being broken by the NVA that stabbed him. And so the examiners thought that he was dead, and they would actually begin to zip up his body bag. And he would be placed among the other dead bodies in body bags and would be recognized by a friend who would call for help. And so the doctor would actually examine him, although he already believed that Roy was dead. And I'll kind of leave Roy to tell the rest of this story.
When we unloaded, they found out I loaded 17 people in that helicopter, including three enemy soldiers. And and because I looked sort of oriental, you know, and I was 60 pounds to go, they let me lay right next to the enemy.
Because they thought you were one of them?
Because I was one of them, and I couldn't talk because my jaws were locked when I got hit with the mouth, and the mouth was the butt of the weapon. But thank God that Jerry Cunningham was there, and he was screaming at the doctor to please, you know, help me and save me. They was putting a body bag on me and everything.
Thought you was finished.
The doctor said there's nothing I can do. And Jerry bent him over to look closer now, and I'm glad he did. When he did, I spit in his face.
Said, I'm alive.
And the doctor said, yeah, he's still out. This one goes to Saigon.
And he would be carried on a stretcher to get treatment, where he had a total of 37 separate bullet, bayonet, and shrapnel wounds of those 6 hours of fighting with the enemy battalion. And he would be taken to Fort Sam Houston Brooke Army Medical Center, where he would eventually recover, receiving the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism and 4 Purple Hearts. And in 1969, he would be assigned to Fort Riley in Kansas, and in 1972, he would move back to Fort Sam in Houston, Texas, where he would remain there until his retirement. Now, I think it's fair to say that Roy, through all these feats and trials and stuff that he gone through in the war, he would deserve the Medal of Honor. But let me go into the events of how he earned it, because it actually took a little bit longer than one would expect. So in 1973, as more details of what happened became available, Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel Ralph R. Drake would actually insist that Roy should receive the Medal of Honor. Unfortunately, the time in which he would have been able to receive the medal expired, and the standard of it was like within 3 years of said event occurring. And there would be an appeal to Congress that did result in an exception for Roy, but the Army Decoration Board denied him an upgrade to his Distinguished Service Cross to the Medal of Honor. And in order for him to get the upgrade, the Army needed another witness besides Roy, who was there during the events of the 6 Hours in Hell. And in a surprise to many, including Roy, there would actually be a living witness who would later provide the eyewitness account necessary for the upgrade. That person being Brian O'Connor, who was a former radio man of Benavidez' Special Forces team in Vietnam, who was also severely wounded. Even though Roy thought he was dead, he would actually be evacuated to the US before his superiors could fully debrief him. And O'Connor, after the war, lived on the Fiji Islands in 1980 on holiday in Australia, who would read the newspaper accounts of Roy from an El Campo newspaper, which during this period of time, the story was being picked up internationally. And from what I could tell, they would get whatever information they could from that and basically copy it into the newspaper. And with that, the Army Decoration Board, now with the account, would actually accept Roy's upgrade to the Medal of Honor. And on the 24th of February, 1981, President Ronald Reagan would present Roy Benavidez with the Medal of Honor in the Pentagon. And thank God he got his medal, because he definitely deserved it. And Roy would retire in 1976, and along with his wife and their 3 children, would return to El Campos, Texas, where he would devote his time to the young people of America. And I'll kind of let him say all this and kind of leave the final word.
So after I went back to Fort Sam Houston, the Beach Pavilion, and I stayed in that hospital almost a year. I continued with my career, and then I was awarded with a medal. I was dedicating myself to come and speak to schools, to civic groups, to help anyone that I can help.
And he would also go to Capitol Hill and pleading with the House Select Committee on Aging to reject the plans to cut off any disability payments that he had received since his retirement, along with other veterans. And they did up rejecting the plan in the end. He would go on to write 3 autobiographies about his life and military experiences, one of them being the book that I have, The 3 Wars of Roy Benavidez, and also writing The Last Medal of Honor and The Medal of Honor, A Veteran's War History in 1995. Roy would pass on November 29th, 1998 at the age of 63 at Brooke Army Medical Center, suffering from respiratory failure and complications of diabetes. And he would be buried with full military honors at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery. And I also want to give a quick shout out to the channel Roy P Benavidez Tango Mike, which is the channel that his daughter runs, Yvette Benavidez Garcia, who I highly recommend. They have so much videos about her father, and if you want to look for anything specific about him, her channel will be right there for you to watch. I'll leave it in the description, so that way if you guys want to go watch it, it'll be right there for you. I also want to bring up the fact that there is actually a G.I. Joe toy of Roy Benavidez. And I'm not gonna lie, I really want it. So if I ever get the chance and I find one, I'm buying that, because it is really cool. And so we reached the end of the video. There really isn't much to say, except that he really is inspirational, especially hearing from him, telling his story. And if you get a chance to read the book, you actually kind of get a glimpse into his life. From what I could recall in the book, he obviously did not have his parents, so that was very tragic. And he did try to do his best. There was a funny story in it about him getting paid to pull on the balls of bulls, because he would basically tell the farmers the ranchers that were right there, that he could do it and that they would pay him if just to watch him do it. So there was like stories like that where he would mention his childhood and stuff like that, and how during his training, how he had to kind of deal with the fact that he was very hot-headed and stuff like that, with one story in it of him punching a superior officer because the superior officer was drunk, and his friend would tell him, hey, hit him. And obviously he followed his lead, hit the guy, and there was another officer there who was, with that officer, and that kind of got him in trouble. But it's like experiences like those in the book that kind of show you a little bit about his life, because in that same story, he had to kind of tell his superior officer if he did it or not, and there was something in the back that kind of made him tell the truth to show honesty, because he had a lot of pride in like wanting to be a soldier and stuff like that. And I think that's very awesome, especially seeing him mention how he sees other people as heroes, that he doesn't see himself as a hero. And I think that's pretty cool. He is pretty up there with like Don Alejo and so many others. Yeah, I think I'll leave it with that. Anything for the future, probably the next video will be another episode of Fears to Fathom. In terms of date, probably sooner. They're a lot easier to record than these kinds of videos, so that'll be out way sooner than you'll probably expect. Probably, let's say for sure next month. And then I'll see if I can cook up another video. And see, my goal will be to do 2 uploads a month, but you will get guaranteed gameplay at least once a month, since, like I said, they're a lot easier. But yes, that is all that I have for you guys for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys enjoy anything that I have in my catalog so far, and if you want to see anything in the future, well, just sit back, subscribe, and yep, that's all there is to it. All right, without further ado, hope you guys have a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good night. Until next time, take care.
My life was spared for a reason, and I hope there's a good reason. A lot of people call me a hero. I appreciate the title, but the real heroes are the ones that gave their life for this country. The real heroes are our wives, our mothers. Above all, the heroes are the ones that are laying in those hospitals, disabled for life in those hospital beds. But the real heroes are the future leaders of our country, these students that are staying in school and learning to say no to drugs. Those are our real heroes. You know, there's a saying among us veterans, for those that had fought for it, life has a special flavor. The protected will never know. You have never lived till you almost died. And it is us veterans that pray for peace, most of all, especially the wounded, because we have to suffer the wounds of war. I'm asked hundreds of times, would you do it over again? In my 25 years in the military, I feel like I've been overpaid for the service to my country. There'll never be enough paper to print the money, nor enough gold in Fort Knox for me to have to keep from doing what I did. I'm proud to be an American, and I'm even prouder that I've earned the privilege to wear the Green Beret. I live by the motto of duty, honor, country. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.